Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Dear brothers and sisters, and welcome to Ask Eman. I'm your host, Ihtisham, and we're joined by our esteemed and beloved Sheikh, Imam Abid. Assalamu alaikum, Sheikh. How are you doing?
Alhamdulillah, how are you?
Good, alhamdulillah. Jazakallah khair for coming on the show to answer our special guests and special viewers who join us and to have their questions answered. Inshallah, we have a few questions already that come through the social media regarding the Udhiyah, because we are coming into the blessed month of Dhul Hijjah as well. But I had a particular question I wanted to start with, right? And it got posed to me once, and I was wondering if you'd help answer it. Someone said to me that they were a vegetarian, and was the Udhiyah still necessary for them? And they were very conflicted in how that moral kind of belief that they held by being vegetarian and the obligation of doing the sacrifice as well. So,
okay. Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Alhamdulillah hamdan kathiran tayyiban mubarakan fi. وأشهد أن لا إله إلا الله وحده لا شريك له وأشهد أن محمدا عبده ورسوله صلى الله عليه وعلى آله وصحبه وسلم رب اشرح لي صدري ويسر لي أمري واحلل عقدة من لساني يفقه قولي. So it's an interesting question, no doubt. And I think there are a couple of aspects to this. One is about the belief of that can, if you like, be the backdrop to one choosing to be a vegetarian. The other is about the Udhiyah specifically.
yeah.
In terms of being a vegetarian, there's absolutely no issue choosing to be a vegetarian. Absolutely fine. It may even be the better thing for a given person. Their health, their situation, what their kind of their personal body needs happen to be. They have a kind of sensitivity to certain types of dietary needs, etc. That's fine. Or they just simply don't like it. Meat. I mean, it's maybe something you laugh at, you know, right?
Sounds strange to me.
It sounds strange to you, but it's absolutely conceivable, theoretically impossible, and there are people like. But the issue of halal and haram is independent of what I like or what I don't like. What's my own preference? It's something which is taken to be much more objective. It's what's Islamically believed to be revealed, right? And that's Allah says in the Quran, وَيُحِلُّ لَهُمُ الطَّيِّبَاتِ وَيُحَرِّمُ عَلَيْهِمُ الْخَبَائِثِ. That Allah sent the Messenger ﷺ and all the messengers before him, from Noah to Abraham to Moses to Jesus to Muhammad ﷺ, peace be upon them all, with revelation and guidance. And in the seal of the prophets and messengers, Muhammad ﷺ, coming with that which kind of reinforces the core same message of oneness of God, and then in terms of the practicalities of it, being said that making the good things halal and those which are kind of filthy, lowly things haram. So making the good lawful and that which is, if you like, unbecoming for us as people, as individuals, and as people en masse, to make that unlawful, spiritually, Islamically speaking. So long as one's preferences don't overlap and override, that which God says is right and wrong, then actually we're not even in a moral dilemma of any sorts. Again, all of this above doesn't actually take away from the fact that in a given time or place, if there's concern for the existence or the extinction of a given animal or creature, those are kind of relevant discussions as well. When it comes to Udhiyah, however, this is not just a meat feast, right? It's actually, Allah says in the Quran, لَن يَنَالَ اللَّهَ لُحُومُهَا وَلَا دِمَاؤُهَا وَلَكِنْ يَنَالُهُ التَّقْوَى مِنْكُمْ. Neither the flesh nor the blood is actually what reaches Allah. It is the taqwa, the God consciousness, which reaches Him. Someone could say, then why do we need to do the Udhiyah? No, precisely the opposite. Allah chose for your God consciousness to come to Him through, if you like, mounted off the back of your effort of sacrifice, representing that which happened time ago with our father Abraham and with his son, of the act of having this loving, willing surrender and submission of our inner dependencies before Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And so that's meant to be regarded and respected. The biggest aspect of the Udhiyah, which people forget and overlook, often even when they choose to get their Udhiyah done abroad, right? They kind of have reduced it just to an act of charity, right? But in reality, there's several different components to it. Charity is one component. But actually, the overarching theme of it is the remembrance of God. So the fact that the name of Allah is mentioned, of God is mentioned at the point of sacrifice, in the land that it's happening in. That is Allah being mentioned on His globe, on His earth, and recognizing that all life and all death comes from it and will return unto Him. It's almost symbolizes our own life and journey in many ways. And even that which we eat and we take by way of sustenance and provisions is from Him. So then do we not owe Him gratitude and worship and ubudiyah, servitude? So those are some of the underlying concepts and themes behind it. Whether you choose to eat from it or not yourself, or your friend in this scenario, it doesn't actually have a bearing on whether the udhiyah is relevant or not. Udhiyah is relevant either way.
So, subhanAllah, you said something very powerful and amazing. Is that the glorification? Sorry, the glorification of Allah. That's throughout the lands, which is amazing. With that, however, I think that the premise of this escapes people's mind, and they think very financially of going for the cheapest option. And that's become a very normal thing where charities, for example, they label packages of udhiyah and sacrifice kind of as which package are you going to go for.
Yeah.
Is going for the cheapest package not showing our obedience?
No, I mean, so no doubt one has to do that which is within one's capacity, and one has scope for. If you cannot afford something more than that, that's a separate scenario. But otherwise, there's a hierarchy, if I can use that, of what's considered the most superior udhiyah or qurbani. So, for example, is it going to be a camel or a camel and a cow and a ram, etc., etc.? Or according to Imam Malik, the ram is the most superior, followed by the camel and so on. But the point is, those which have the best value, the best quality meat, because you're giving before Allah as a sacrifice that which has the highest quality. Right? Sure. If someone chooses something which is a cheaper option, so long as it fulfills the conditions, it's acceptable. Yeah. It's valid. It's legit. But is that the most superior option? No, it's not. Right? But there's a whole question, which is why has it been taken over the Qurbani scene by the charity sector? Is it actually just an act of charity, or is it an act actually of devotion? Right? It can be both. And it is actually both at one level. But it's like we've become tunnel visioned, and we see it primarily with the characteristic of being a charity, whereas it's actually something above that and beyond that.
Yeah, no, it's strikingly, it actually escapes a lot of our minds when we come to this time of year, because we're bombarded with all that kind of advertisement and the packages that get given to us. We do have a caller on the line though, Sheikh. Assalamu alaikum, dear brother. You have a question for us.
Assalamu alaikum. I got a question. Sheikh, I'm going inshallah Hajj.
I'll accept it.
And I've got a problem with my both knees. I got arthritis.
Okay.
And I'm using ointment and then also using a kneecap support.
Okay.
So I know that kneecap support, I can't use it, but can I use the bandage so then to protect my knees? Is that is permissible? And
yes,
can I use the ointment, which is not actually it's not a sweet smell or anything? It's just only a medicinal smell.
Okay, that's fine. Are those two your only questions?
Yes, that's it.
No problem. We'll ask that to the Sheikh now. Sheikh.
So, brother, first of all, congratulations on you going on Hajj. May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala accept it from you and facilitate it for you. In terms of, the situation you discussed, I would suggest you actually take it up with both someone who's a medical expert who can kind of look at your situation, but also then, of course, a scholar who can speak to your specific scenario. Regarding what the underlying premise of your question, the premise of the question is based on the fact that a person is not allowed to wear what scholars have come to term as makhit, which is translated as stitched garments. Now, that doesn't mean there's not stitching. Like, for example, even the towels that guys tend to wear when it's ihram, it can be non-towel material, of course, as well. But there's some stitching there. Stitch means it takes the shape of one's limbs, right, as form of clothing. It would appear, and that some would actually point out that if there's a bandage around one's knee, that's not actually a stitched garment in the sense. There's stitching there, and it does take the shape of one's one's limb, but it doesn't cover a full limb. One, and number two, it's actually for need/necessity. But number three, also, it's not worn as an attire of clothing. Does that make sense? So there are other things which the scholars have, the majority of scholars have allowed. So for example, when we have a bag or the like, those are things which actually do take the shape sometimes of a particular limb or part of the body, but it's not seen as actually, if you like, violating the Islamic fiqh norms. This is one position I'd put to you as a very credible option for you to consider and to discuss with a scholar. In conjunction to that, there would be some who'd say it may be a violation of sorts, but based on it being on a needs basis, because there's an actual medical condition, which you state, arthritis, etc., then you would maybe pay a singular dam for that as just to kind of compensate and to be on the safe side. And then others further may, as a minority opinion, state that actually it's something not to be done, period, right? So that's regarding the actual bandage that's kind of a knee support. There was a second question which was about an ointment.
Yeah, the ointment, it doesn't have a fragrance. It smells of ethanol, menthol.
That's absolutely fine in terms of, because it's not actually perfume, nor is it that which is equivalent to perfume. So it's inshallah permissible, and Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala knows it best. Of course, do consult with a medical expert as well and a scholar who can speak to your specific circumstances.
Jazakallah khair, Sheikh. Thank you so much. We'll join you shortly on the other side of this break. Do join us again. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Dear brothers and sisters, thank you for joining us once again on Ask Eman. I'm your host, Ehtisham. Brothers and sisters, we are live on the social media platforms, Facebook and YouTube. Do join us on there, as well as calling us directly into the studio on 0203 515 0757. Sheikh, Jazakallah khair for joining us again. I do have a question here, and it asks, it's from Harun. It says, is Qurbani and Udhiyah the same thing?
Brother Harun, Jazakallah khairan for your question. Yes, the two are interchangeable. They're synonymous. Same thing.
They're the same thing. It's just a language difference.
Yeah.
That's all it is. Alhamdulillah. We have a question from YouTube. Does the whole family have to refrain from cutting their hair?
Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. The opinion which states that the person, that the udhiyah requires the non-cutting of one's hair and one's nails, etc., until the sacrifice has been performed, is one of the three opinions on the issue. There are actually there's more than one opinion whether that's required or not, okay? But just to begin with, it only applies to the person who is offering the sacrifice. That's to say the person who's paying for it. So, yes, if there's only one person offering it and that's all that's being offered, then the rest of the family would not be required to abstain from cutting off their nails or their hair. That having been said, the issue of who has to be having a Qurbani done on their behalf, there are two opinions, as I've mentioned previously, actually in a previous session. One which says actually every single member of the household has a Qurbani done on their behalf, a ram, right? That's the position of the Hanafi school of thought. The other madhahib generally say that actually one would suffice the whole family. Means all the dependents on the family. So the kids would be, the minors would all be covered by the breadwinner of the household. And no one else would be required to abstain from cutting their hair or their nails. There are other views on this issue. So again, the Hanafi school of thought does not regard it as actually required or prescribed in any way, shape or form to not cut one's hair or one's nails. Later on, in the later kind of Hanafi jurists, they said maybe there's some istihbab or preference in not doing so, khurujan min al-khilaf, just to kind of be on the safe side because there are some other valid opinions. But the established position was it's not required. The Malikiyah had something similar, but there was a discussion regarding preferability and dislikeness of doing so. But basically, it really lies within the Hanbali school of thought that said it's not permissible, and the Shafis that said it's not, if you like, it's makruh. But the Hanafi and Maliki schools were much more, if you like, non-prescriptive in terms of doing so, and in the first instance. So in summary, there's more than one view regarding whether it's required not to cut one's hair or nails in the first place or not. Those who said it's not allowed, they limited it to the person who is doing the udhiyah, i.e. paying for it, not the person who's doing it. If I'm deputizing someone else, then let's say, I don't know, Sri Lanka or somewhere else, if I'm doing it abroad, it's not them that's addressed, it's me, myself, who's paying for it. They would be required not to cut my hair or my nails, not my wife or my kids, etc. Is that clear?
Yeah, very clear. Jazakallah khair. Does the person offering the sacrifice have to do anything special apart from maybe financing the sacrifice itself? Is there any kind of other acts of worship they do in line with it? Not
other acts of worship. I mean, obviously, these are the 10 most superior days in terms of worshipping Allah. So all acts of tasbih, tahleel, saying subhanallah, alhamdulillah, Allahu akbar, giving charity, prayer, nawafil, Quranic recitation, praying in jama'ah, being kind to one's neighbours, dutiful to one's elders. All of those things are great things to do, but that's not attached to the Qurbani. That's just because of the 10 days. So regarding the Qurbani or the Udhiyah, there's paying for it and making sure if you're instructing someone else to do it, that you have done your DD, your due diligence, to ensure that they know what they're doing, to look out for all the kind of, so, what was termed the so-called defects, so it's a good quality animal that will be, chosen, selected, and that actually is going to be done in a merciful and honourable way, kind of avoiding any sort of unnecessary pain or difficulty for the animal. It's not one animal in front of another animal being sacrificed, etc. It's done with absolute minimal sort of discomfort as possible. And also that actually it's going to be done on the right time, within the right window, not delaying it, not before the Eid. So those basic due diligence points is something that you should feel invested in. It's not just a case of tapping on the clicking on the mouse or the keyboard and job done, and you've outsourced your duty.
Yeah.
You should take ownership of it.
SubhanAllah, we feel very
Detached.
detached from any act of worship nowadays. The effort is gone because it's all so digital.
Yep.
It's just a click of a button. It's going to be done. I don't need to know about it. And we're very absent-minded about if it's happened or not happened.
Absolutely.
I think the only time we worry about it is when we got to go to the barber just before Eid. Has it happened? Can I cut my hair? We have a question from YouTube, Sheikh. Sister Farha says, in India, they say that only one person can sacrifice one goat. And the person sacrifices, it's only accepted for the person sacrificing and not for the rest of the family.
So is this in terms of the law of the land or Islamically?
I think it's just generally Islamically, that's the pervading opinion there.
He's not saying that there's some sort of restriction on the number of sacrifices in India.
No, I don't think so. Because they're saying the accepted is for the person who's purchased it.
So could you read that one back?
Yeah, so in India they say that for one person, only one goat will be sacrificed. And it will be accepted only for the said person who purchases the animal. So my question is if a family is poor, then?
So Sister Farha Khatun's question, just in terms of that, the answer is that this position that you're describing, Sister Farha, is the position of the Hanafi school of thought. And that makes sense also because in India, that is the prevailing madhab. So, and it's a bona fide, it's a legitimate, valid opinion, and it's actually what we'd say, of course, as well. So, therefore, yes, one sacrifice per, if you like, individual per head, a ram that is, or more, and that if you do that, that's fine. Now, what happens if the person is poor or the family is poor? Then they only do that which is within their capacity and not beyond. And if someone's actually poor, such that they would be receiving zakah and the like, then it wouldn't even be wajib upon them, because in the Hanafi school of thought, the udhiyah is actually wajib, whereas in the other schools of thought, the Malikiyya, Shafi'iyya and Hanabila, it's actually seen as something which is sunnah or mustahab, sunnah mu'akkada, right? It's highly emphasized sunnah, but it's not actually mandated. Whereas in the Hanafi school of thought, it is mandated. And hence, they'd say if you're poor, the requirement is waived and not applicable.
Sure.
Allah knows best.
So we have that age-old question, is it better to do locally or abroad?
The default assumption is that one would ordinarily do it locally. Of course, there's no reason why you can't actually, in theory, do both locally and do an act of sadaqah, abroad, if that's what your capacity allows, your financial situation allows that, and then you do so, absolutely fine, and preferable. But if you can't afford it, now there's a kind of mutually exclusive either or sort of scenario that you're faced with. And in principle, you do it over here such that all the benefits of the udhiyah are, present. The mention of God's name, at the sacrifice of Allah's name, and, you're both able to benefit from yourself, your family members and friends and community members. There's that kind of sharing of the festive joy, as you kind of exchange some of the food or the meat, etc. And of course, to give to poor people, you're able to do, a food drive, a soup kitchen, etc., giving it to the poor as well. So that's, in principle, the best thing to do. If there happened to be, a famine elsewhere, which often there is, it's something then you'd evaluate and then you'd try and see which one's better. Or let's say if you've got poor family members abroad as well, then that might be a mechanism. But again, I highlight, the udhiyah is not, the overarching thing is not just an act of sadaqah. You have all the year to do sadaqah, inshallah ta'ala.
We have a question from YouTube. Brother Shams is asking, if a family member includes my name in a share, do I have to do my own Qurbani?
So yes, Brother Shams, thank you for your question. The answer has been alluded to in saying that there are two opinions as to whether one udhiyah covers the entirety of the family or not. The Hanafi school of thought saying no, it's per head, whereas the other school of thoughts within the four say that actually it is in principle what's mandated is one for the family, i.e. the person who's the breadwinner and the other dependents. If, however, you happen to be an independent earner, just living, in a joint household, then you should have your own independent one anyway, according to all of the schools of thought. And Allah knows best.
Okay. We have a question on WhatsApp. Can a person pray 2 rak'ah prayer for wudu, for example, and combine the intention with another 2 rak'ah sunnah prayer? So
Can
it's
they,
completely unrelated. Can they join two?
with sunnah and tahiyyat al-wudu?
Yeah.
Yes. So, brother, the answer to your question, or brother or sister, is that actually, yes, you can. This is an issue known as tadakhul niyya or tashriq niyya, which is whether you can overlap intentions. And so long as that sunnah is just a normal sunnah, and this is not maqsooda li dhatiha, as I'll explain perhaps after the break, then inshallah it's absolutely fine. It is acceptable, and may Allah accept it from you. Ameen.
Ameen, ameen. Sheikh, there was a question here which I had was, we are very close to the break. So brothers and sisters, I will say, do join us on Facebook and YouTube. We are live, obviously, on the channel. You can feel free to call us live in the studio, which is 0203 515 0757. We'll see you shortly after the break, and we have some amazing questions that are lined up. But Sheikh, just one of them I will just ask you, but we'll touch upon after the break very shortly, is, am I obliged to distribute the sacrifice in specific portions? Some to family, some to the poor. But we'll touch upon this, and I'll re-ask it after our break. So brothers and sisters, we'll see you shortly on the other side. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Dear brothers and sisters, Jazakallah khaira for joining us on this Ask Eman, and I am your host Ihtisham. I will encourage you all to tune in live on Facebook. Please put your comments down on the YouTube as well. We're having some amazing questions and a great discussion here live on the studio. I would also ask you to call in 0203 515 0757. Sheikh, we have a sister on the line. She'd like to ask you her question. Assalamu alaikum, sister.
Walaikum assalam.
Yes, sister, what's your question?
I'm a single parent, and I've been doing the Qurbani for a long time. I was told as a woman I'm not eligible to do the Qurbani. But now my adult children, who are two of them are working, and we all living in one household. And the question is, I'm allowed to do Qurbani as a woman, and if we all have one pot where all the earning going, so do we have to do an individual Qurbani as 3 adults, or are we going to do one Qurbani as a household?
Okay, Jazakallah khair. That's fine.
Sister, you don't have any specific madhab that you would be aligned to, etc., correct?
Sorry?
You don't belong to a particular school of thought. You just mean in terms of in general you'd like some information regarding this, correct?
I'm Sunni Hanafi. And,
Okay, that's absolutely fine. So I'll answer.
That's straight Muslim.
Understood. Thank you for your question. Jazakallah khair.
Jazakallah khair, Sheikh. So the question is, obviously, as a female, can she give Qurbani, and collectively as a family, do they have to do individual ones?
Sure. So thank you for your question. First and foremost, let's get this out of the way. There's no restriction whatsoever on a female offering a Qurbani. All the servants of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala are servants of Allah, and there's no restriction on a male or a female worshipping Allah through a Qurbani or an Udhiyah being offered. So I hope that's clear. There's never has been, to the best of our knowledge, at least any sort of Islamic, if you like, impediment from a person, male or female, offering a Qurbani or an Udhiyah. Secondly, in terms of what to do for yourselves, yes, there are multiple earners, but in principle, each earner or person who has, is solvent and has their own wealth, etc., would offer at least a ram per head. So per head, that would be independent, even if it's put into one pot. Ultimately, there would be some earnings or some money that would still be the preserve or the reserve of one in each individual, and they would do it per head. And that's the position, as you said, of the Hanafi school of thought. There is another position which is held by the other schools, which basically says a singular Udhiyah Qurbani would suffice the entire family. But that's, as I said, of the other schools of thought, Malikiya, Shafi'iyya, Hanabila. Okay? And may Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala accept it from you and from us.
Ameen, Ameen, Ya Rab. We have a question from Sister Jemima saying, am I obliged to distribute the sacrifice in certain portions for the family and the poor? The question we just had asked just before the break.
Okay. Thank you, Sister Jemima, for your question. In answer to this, it's not prescriptive. It's not required for you to do it in just one set of proportions or the other. That having been said, there were various opinions which do exist, which state maybe as a suggestion, it's a advisory sort of proportions that have been set out. So Imam Ahmad rahimahullah mentions that the taqsim or the division of the udhiyah, the qurbani, would be in thirds. So a third for oneself and one's family and household, a third for neighbors within the community, etc., and a third for also for the poor. So a third for the poor, a third for, if you like, one's neighbors and friends, and a third for one's self and one's family. And this has also been attributed to Sayyiduna Ibn Abbas radiyallahu anhuma, who said something similar for the fuqara. He said for the jiran and asdiqa and for oneself. So those are the thirds. And this has also been alluded to by one of the great scholars of the past, mentioned by Ibn Qudam al-Maqdisi as well, again from the Hanbali school of thought. That was, he mentions this from Abu Musa al-Asfahani. But otherwise, there's other views which do exist, saying a half for oneself, a half for the poor. It's not prescriptive, but basically try and consider all of those categories in the three categories in some way, shape or form, and understand ultimately the overarching goal is even beyond the meat. It is the proclamation of the oneness and the sublimity of the one maker, who's worthy of all of our devotion at the highest level of love and hope and reliance. And that's worship, basically. And that's Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala.
Amazing. We have a question from Brother Zain saying, if you give Qurbani in a different country and there is a great time difference, can the Qurbani happen before my Eid namaz here in the UK? And does it have to be slaughtered according to the UK time?
So it does not need to be done according to UK time, as long as it's happening after the Eid Salah in the country of, that's being the respective country, that suffices. And generally speaking, there are some scholars who say so long as you know it's happening, it could have happened on Eid's day itself, that suffices. Others would be kind of more scrupulous in their suggestions or statements that actually this is required that you ascertain with certitude that it's actually being performed in that country, and then you start taking the relaxation of the Udhiyah having been completed. And Allah knows best.
So we've kind of partially covered this, but can a Qurbani be offered on behalf of others? And I'm going to add it here. For example, the deceased.
So on behalf of others, you are allowed to do, it's an issue known as Isal al-Thawab. Isal al-Thawab, or also known as Ihda al-Thawab, gifting the reward for a deed. There's some scholars who say, actually, why should you gift a deed that you do on behalf of anyone else? Is that something which is known from the companions or the like? And they say it's not, and therefore it should not be done. And they moreover go on to state that the Quran says, وَأَلَّيْسَ لِلْإِنسَانِ إِلَّا مَا سَعَى, that no person will have except that which they themselves have striven for. And they mention the hadith of the Prophet ﷺ where he says, إِذَا مَاتَ ابْنُ آدَمْ انْقَطَعَ عَنْهُ عَمْلُهُ إِلَّا مِنْ ثَلَثٍ من صدقة جارية أو علم ينتفع به أو والد صالح يدعو له. That when a person passes away, all their deeds are severed from them except for three things. A صدقة جارية, an ongoing charity, a school that you set up, or an orphanage, or some sort of good deed, even the planting of a tree from which others eat and benefit, etc. Or knowledge which benefits others, or a righteous child that will make dua for you. So it's as if all of the ongoing charities and sources of reward have been restricted or limited to these three things. On the flip side, you find that actually what turns out to be the majority of opinion from the four schools, as is mentioned by scholars such as Ibn Qudama, it's one of the two opinions attributed to the Hanbali jurist Ibn Taymiyyah as well. But basically it says that no, you can do, and some even said there's merit in doing so. We're talking about general good deeds as a matter of course. And they say that yes, the hadith mentions three, but there are other things which we know we can do for the dead. For example, you can do Hajj on behalf of someone who's passed away, who intended to perform the Hajj and was unable to perform the Hajj before they passed away. You can do that, even though it's not mentioned within the three. So it's not exhaustive, the list of three things. And they say you can therefore gift the thawab or include others within it. And they mentioned the hadith of the Prophet ﷺ, that of course you have one hadith about the Prophet ﷺ on Hajj, where he did it on behalf of himself and upon behalf of his ummah. Okay, again leading the precedent of that happening, they argue. And the hadith in Abu Dawud and elsewhere in the Sunan, or some of the Sunan books, it's mentioned specifically outside the Hajj, but in the Udhiyah, in the Qurbani, this is something that the Prophet ﷺ is said to have done. He said on behalf of himself and his family and his community of followers, i.e. past his time as well, it's been covered. So in that again lies a precedent, it's said that by the Prophet ﷺ for that. And so basically out of the four schools of thought, this is a position of the Hanafis, is one of their opinions, on the Malikiyah and the Hanbalis. The Shafi'is say it's not permissible for one to do so unless specifically they had made a wasiyah, which means a bequest instructing that be done from their money or the like. Then it could be done. But otherwise, it shouldn't be done according to the Shafi'is. The other schools either allow it, prescribe it, or tolerate it.
Yeah. Okay. We have a question from Brother Muhammad, who's tuned into YouTube. He says, if I haven't paid for the Qurbani yet and intend to do it, should I stop cutting my nails and hair?
He hasn't intended it yet.
He's not paid for it, but he intends to do it.
Yes. The hadith says, إِذَا أَرَادَ أَحَدُكُمْ أَن يُضَحِّي فَلَا يَأْخُذْ مِنْ أظافره أو شعره كما قال عليه الصلاة والسلام. If one of you intends to make the udhiyah, then let them not take from their nails, cut their nails or their hair. Hadith is, in the Sahih, but other scholars did discuss whether it's authentic or what the inference from it is. So some scholars said, as I mentioned, that it's not actually required. There's a minority view which says it's actually haram, impermissible to do so. One view which says it's makruh, and others said it's permissible to, and there's no restriction on the cutting of hair or nails.
Jazakallah khair, Sheikh. We have a question that says, do you have to offer the Qurbani if you are in debt? And we have about 40 seconds to answer this.
So it depends what sort of debt you have. So if you have debt but you still have a surplus of assets, then you're not classified as being poor, and so you're still addressed by it, by the instruction of it. Those who hold it to be wajib would say if you're actually in the red, then of course you don't, because you're not in a position to do so. Those who say it's sunnah mu'akkada, strongly emphasize sunnah, they say hang on a minute, whether you're in debt or you're not in debt, you're still not obliged to do so. It's recommended for you to do so. So you can consider your circumstance. And ultimately, I'd end by saying that the debt is a question of whether the debt is immediately required or there's some time before you have to pay it. And Allah knows best.
Jazakallah khair. Assalamu alaikum. We'll see you shortly. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh, dear brothers and sisters. Thank you for joining us on Ask Eman. I'm your host, Ihtisham. I would say please do join us on the Facebook Live as well as the YouTube. YouTube comments are going wild right now, I'm hearing, and there's a lot of discussion happening. Do call us as well, please, if you can do on 0203 515 0757. Sheikh, we have a question from YouTube. Is a goat or a sheep sufficient for a family, or does each person need to give their own Qurbani? I know it's been covered, but maybe we can talk about shares and how they work as well.
Yeah, so a cow or a camel has 7 parts to it. Accordingly, if you are taking the opinion or you're a follower of the school of thought that says that actually promotes the position that says actually there's 1 Qurbani required per head, then actually, let's say there's 4 of you, then actually 4 portions out of the 7 portions that a cow or a camel has would suffice. Alternately, if you actually hold the opinion or you follow the opinion which says 1 suffices the whole family, then actually 1 portion of the 7 portions of a camel or a cow would cover for the whole family, just like a full ram would. So basically, imagine the equivalent of 7 rams being sacrificed with a singular cow or a singular camel, for that matter.
Okay, Jazakallah khair. We have a question from WhatsApp that says, can you pray with perfume on your clothes that has alcohol in it?
Okay, so this is down to the issue of alcohol being permissible, or being tahir or najis. Alcohol itself is, according to the 4 schools of thought, it's considered to be najis, which means spiritually there's an impurity in terms of one having it on while praying, or just generally it's considered to be najis. There's a position outside the 4 schools which is upheld by the Zahiri school of thought, which is not really from the mainstay of the 4 schools, right? And it says there's no issue, it's no problem. They say it's haram. They're clear on that, as are all the Muslims, in terms of consumption, but not in terms of application and usage. That having been said, the alcohol being mentioned here, I would imagine or I'd suggest would be actually ethanol, as opposed to actually the kind of alcohol that's imbibed. And so is this ruling the same? It would be pointed out that actually the ruling would be distinct in the terms of it's just an ingredient and also in very small quantities indeed. And thus the ruling would not apply to it, especially if the composition has changed as well. And Allah knows best.
Okay, Jazakallah khair. We have a question here, and may Allah allow us to be in such a position. I mean, can I do more than 1 sacrifice?
The short answer is, according to the majority of scholars, yes, you can, inshallah.
Okay, alhamdulillah.
And either way, you could do 1 as actually your udhiyah, and you can do others as by way of just sadaqah.
Alhamdulillah. In terms of the shares specifically, if you just give a part of that share, is it sufficient for everyone, or do you have to give all 7 shares?
I don't follow.
No, as in just one share is sufficient.
So I'm going to do 1 share of a camel.
A camel, okay.
Okay. Now, what's
and that covers the entire
that covers
family.
me. No, so the question is, if we say 1 per head is required, like a ram per head,
okay,
and there are 4 of us in the family, then we do 4 portions of the cow, job done,
right.
And the other 3, either someone else can also co-buy that,
sure,
that cow or that camel, and that family of 3. So that 1 camel or that 1 cow, which has 7 portions, be that cow or camel,
sure,
would cover the 2 families, altogether 7 people.
Right, okay.
Alternatively, there's 4 of us, but we say, you know what, we'll do the 4 portions, and the other 3 is just sadaqah.
Okay.
Right?
Right.
And if we want to really go like all out, we say, you know, alhamdulillah, Allah's blessed with a lot of wealth, we'll do 1 cow, which has 7 portions per head, right?
Wow.
If someone can afford that, then fine.
Sure. Okay. We have a question where it says, I'm required to actually keep my nails short for work purposes. Is this something I'd have to reject, or is it something I can, while still doing the sacrifice, maintain?
Okay, so the position ultimately, I'm not familiar with your specific work circumstance, so you may need to speak to someone, a scholar who knows your specific nuances. That having been said, as I mentioned, the majority of scholars do not hold it as something which is obligatory or and mandated in that sense for you not to cut your nails during the 10 days owing to your intent of performing the sacrifice. So according to the majority of scholars, your fine even if you're cutting your nails. And according to all scholars, to the best of our knowledge, overwhelmingly, even those who say it's mandated, i.e. obligatory, they don't say that your udhiyah qurbani would not be valid or acceptable, right? And if there's an actual need or necessity due to your work, I imagine that's the sound, almost what I'm inferring from it, then there's a fiqhi maxim which says, وَكُلُّ مَمْنُوعٍ فَلِلضَّرُورَةِ يُبَاحُ وَالْمَكْرُوهُ عِنْدَ الْحَاجَةِ, as mentioned in the couple of poetry, which says, and everything which is, not everything, but in essence, several things, many things which come as haram, or there's an injunction saying do not do so, in extremis where life or limb, or where there's an actual necessity, generally speaking, then actually there can be some latitude which is exercised as per, scholarly oversight to ensure that actually it's properly managed, but basically it can thereby be, there's a relaxation of that rule. And similarly, things which are makruh, then the karaha or the dislike nature of it actually becomes something which is admissible due to the circumstances itself. So inshallah, it's fine for you to shorten it accordingly. There's of course an option which, if you feel very passionately, strongly hold the view that it's the correct opinion is that it's not to be cut at all and it's haram to do so, then if it may be there's an option for you to take some days away off from work for leave, etc. But I don't think that sounds like it would be necessary given the spread and the breadth of the views which say it's not mandated.
We have a question here. It says, can I give meat raw or cooked?
Either's fine.
So there's no preference?
It depends who you're giving it to.
Yeah. So you want it specifically in like a biryani form?
I'm not saying anything.
Alhamdulillah, alhamdulillah. We had a question about animals, but I think you've generally covered that. Could you just refresh on the 4 animals as well for us, please?
On the 4 animals?
Oh, on the sacrifice.
Okay, sacrifices. So we just said there's some animals. To be honest with you, brothers and sisters, though I don't always have the highest confidence in how charities might deal with things. It'll vary from charity to charity. I don't want to give a blanket generic statement about any industry, but you'll hear it being repeated many, many times. This is one thing which I don't think anyone will get too wrong, inshallah. But in general terms, a cow or a camel has 7 portions to it. So if you're talking about a cow or a camel, then 7 portions to it. And that means whether you want, if you want one sacrifice for yourself, and eat one for your children, you've got a son and daughter, and one for your wife, that's 4 portions. You can have by 4 shares of a camel or 4 shares of a cow. And there'll still be 3 shares remaining in that camel or that cow, because a camel has 7 shares to it. A cow has 7 shares to it. As for a ram, or a goat, then it's 1 person, there's only 1 share in it. And that's the answer to the question.
Thank you. We have a question from Brother Sa'ad on YouTube. He says, what if the seller sold the animal and did fraud, which was not of the minimum age, and we got to know after the sacrifice? Will it be accepted?
If it turns out that they had sold you something which is incorrect, or and you found out before the sacrifice, then you should actually try and get another sacrifice if you're able to afford it. And that would then take the place of the one that you're about to sacrifice. And you can either sell on the one that you have for other purposes, i.e. for people who just want it for meat as opposed to for the sacrifice. And Allah knows best.
So with Dhul Hijjah approaching, how do we kind of start the month? How do we keep going in these best 10 days that are approaching? Because we're also approaching the end of the show. We have about 2 minutes left. So how do we kind of prepare for that now?
The Prophet ﷺ said, ما من أيام العمل الصالح فيهن أحب إلى الله من هذه العشر. There are no days in which the doing of good deeds are more beloved to Allah than in these 10 days. And the scholars discuss which days are more superior in the sight of Allah. The days of Ramadan, like let's say the last 10 days of Ramadan, or the 10 days, the first 10 days of Dhul Hijjah. Some said this, some said that. The seemingly settled position was to say the 10 nights of Eid, the 10 nights of Ramadan, the last 10 nights of Ramadan, are superior to the nights of Dhul Hijjah. But the 10 days of Dhul Hijjah are superior to the days of Ramadan itself, which is just enormous, because you see people sometimes taking days off Ramadan and the like, but this is kind of just like normal days. And that's not at all the situation. these are the days when which Hajj is occurring, which is retracing the steps of Ibrahim alayhi salam. And that is the journey of love. It's the pinnacle, in a way, of, what the Islamic kind of mindset really represents, where you are on this journey of inner surrender towards Allah, Him alone, in that sense.
What we normally have, to kind of just interject there, is we have a very detached relationship with Dhul Hijjah and being non-Hujjaj. How do we kind of cultivate
it's
that?
Almost to kind of speak to that the Prophet ﷺ said that these days are the most superior, Hajj or non-Hajji, irrespective, the days themselves are sacred, right? Because they're the days in which these deeds are being done, right? Think about Arafah. We all know for ourselves, Arafah is something that's so, it's such a holy time, right?
Yeah.
Even though we're not on the plane of Arafah itself. And we're fasting still to try and cultivate that. So in these days, do fast if you're able to. Give charity. Remember Allah. Make subhanallah, alhamdulillah, Allah Akbar. Abdullah ibn Umar and Abu Hurairah, they'd even go into their, marketplaces to try and remember Allah and remind others to do so. But keep the message of Allah being, God being greatest in your heart and mind. Keep that at the front throughout.
Jazakallah khair, Sheikh. We are coming to the end of the show, brothers and sisters. Jazakallah khair to our Sheikh who's taken his time out. We'll see you shortly, and we'll see you next time on Ask Eman. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah.